Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Respecting the Beer. My name is Gary Arndt, and with me is the man who's fresh off his 547-date bender, Mr. Joel Hermansen.
That was quite a day. That was fun.
And I missed your speech. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it was a winner. It was really good, I think.
But
I was told it was good.
I want everyone to know we have declared a coup d'etat.
Yes.
We have taken over the podcast. Bobby and Allison are not here. We don't need them.
Yep.
They're done. They're dead to us. I mean, taking over the whole brewery. I don't know anything about brewing,
but you'll notice a huge tonal shift on the podcast tonight.
Yeah.
More
science,
be a lot different.
More objectivity.
More shenanigans.
But we have a great show that we have had lined up for a while. And we have the guys from the Briess Malting Company here. And the reason I wanted to talk to you guys is because malt is something that everyone is familiar with. We've had malt. You know, you could have like a malted milkshake. You've had malted balls. Everyone kind of knows that malt is part of what makes beer. I don't think most people know what malt is. And so it's this mystery grid. So please introduce yourselves and kind of briefly explain what your role is with the company.
My name is Ron Schroder, and I'm the Director of Marketing at Briess. I'm based in Chilton, Wisconsin, and I've been with the company for about 6 years.
I'm Jordon Guerts. I've been with the company for almost 12 years now. I'm the technical maltster. I'm based in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, at our malt plant.
So before we get into your company in particular and your roles, can you tell us what malt is?
Can I preface this with
Sure.
one thing really quickly? So our listeners tune in for the history, the science. So get into the weeds with this. You know, we have some people who will really enjoy hearing the deep dive into this.
So malt is the soul of beer. It is the backbone that creates beer flavor. Really where it comes from, though, is malted barley. That's what malt is typically short for. Other grains can be malted, but...
And what is malting?
The malting process is the process of turning grain into malt through basically the natural process of growing it, right? So steeping, germination, and then drying it out and kilning it.
Okay, but you said it turns grain into malt. What is malt?
And maybe let's talk about those steps in the process a little bit.
Because I know what it is, but it's basically sprouting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it sprouts, green stuff comes up, and then in that kind of I won't say dormant, but like that infant stage of the plant, that's malt, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, walk us through. What are you doing over there in Manitowoc, Jordan? What's happening over there?
So when we're malting grain, we're going through the process of steeping, which is would be introducing water to the grain, right? We're starting the growing process. So sprouting it, right? So the initial process of sprouting it is steeping the grain. Then we go through germination, which is a short growth period. Depending on what we're making, that'll be anywhere from 2 to 5 days. And then kilning it, which is drying it out to make it a useful product for, storage, and then also creating all the unique colors and flavors. So we begin the growth process, and then we stop the growth process and create the colors and flavors that you would then use for beer or spirits.
So we actually have a history class at McFleshman's. Yeah.
Okay.
It's crazy. Twice a year we do a history of beer in the United States, and then in opposite years we do a history of beer in world history. And as part of that, we talk about kind of the evolution of how human beings started down this path and how they got significantly better at doing it. Drying malt initially was not a very successful process, and you ended up with a lot of unevenness. You ended up with a lot of smoke, when they were trying to do it. How do you guys do it that you can keep off flavors out, that you can keep, an even product in there? Like, is it a technological thing? Is it your technique? I'm interested.
So, kilning specifically is one of the most challenging parts of the malting process. You're using a lot of factors, grain moisture, protein content, the level of modification, which is a term that maltsters use readily for basically saying growth. So the amount of growth that the grain has gone through. So we're targeting specific growth levels during the germination process to set us up for to have the proper precursors on the kiln. And thankfully, technology has come quite a ways, not as far as a lot of industries in terms of controls and application, but we can now monitor temperature much more closely. We can now apply temperature very evenly to a grain bed, and we can do that in a way that creates a much more even and uniform product. Knowing how that's being done and being able to control the temperature, time, and moisture content are the critical factors that we use to create different products and different flavors. As to when it's finished, that comes down to operators' decisions, right? So we have our operators on the floor. They go into the grain while it's in the kilning process and take samples. They'll smell, touch, taste the grain. In some cases, they'll run color analysis. In some cases, they'll run just a moisture analysis, and they'll do that to determine at what point the process is finished. And so the ability to measure, the temperature applied, the airspeed applied through fan speeds are the critical factors that we use to create recipes. And then, great inventions like VFDs allow us to have those applied evenly over a large grain mass.
And Bobby would be so into this.
Yeah, should have been here. Too bad.
Right. Yeah. I guess you snooze, you lose. Ron, you were saying, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll build on what Jordon said, because malting in the way he describes it and that it happens at our Manitowoc malt plant is a lot like brewing in that it lives at the intersection of art and science. And we're in a world where a lot of things happen pretty quickly, right? I mean, car assembly or building computers at Dell, you can order a computer and have it delivered in 24 hours. And the process he described takes about a week to get it all the way through the malt plant, with about a day and a half on the front end in steeping, and then usually about 4 days in germination, and then kilning. And if it's roasted, that takes a couple days. And there's all those elements that go into it. And that's one of the things I think is really cool about the malting process, is that process of crafting it. And he talked about the malt being checked at various points. And it is in steeping, in germination, in kilning and roasting. And that's what makes all 50 plus of the products in our line unique, is getting those adjustments just right and getting a consistent product that the brewer can brew with every time.
For those listeners who recognized the quote that Ron just gave to us, we love to use that same terminology about the intersection between art and science. So thank you for using that. That was a home run. How much of this gets done? Like, what's the volume like in Manitowoc?
So volume-wise, it really depends on which process we're talking about. So
what comes? Let's start with this. What comes in? You're taking in 2-row, I would imagine, more often than not. Like, how much is coming in like let's say a week?
I'd have to bust out the pen and paper to figure out the exact number.
But it's a big number.
It's a big number. The malt house capacity is fairly large. At its peak, could produce over 1 million pounds a day.
I'm sorry. Could you say that again?
At its peak usage rate, the Manitowoc Malt House could produce over 1 million pounds a day.
Wow.
That's a lot of beer. I want to go back just a bit. So you're taking a seed, you germinate it. What is special that happens that makes malt, and the reason why it's a desirable thing for people to have, as opposed to just using a seed? What's happening in that process that is where the magic occurs and makes it desirable?
Sure. So the difference, there's a lot of differences in raw barley and finished malt. Some of the biggest differences Well, not even. Hold on. Let me think this through for a second. All right. So the
I wish
biggest-
we had a whiteboard on our podcast.
Oh no, yeah, I can't have a whiteboard. I will draw pictures. It's how
I really wish we had a
that's how I
whiteboard
best
on the
communicate, is
podcast.
if I draw pictures. You
We
got to
could
keep the markers away from me.
Play Beer Pictionary.
I like to have different colors so I can color coordinate things.
Okay.
It becomes a thing. Meetings go very long because I've got a whiteboard. But so in raw barley, a lot of the things that you need for the beer are not available, right? They're bound and they're tied up by cell walls and protein that's going to hold all that stuff, right? So the stuff that makes beer, what we call the extract, right? What's sugar that's extracted during the brewing process is stored as starch in barley. In raw barley, it's just not accessible. So the malting process liberates all that starch so that it's available during the mashing process, and then can be separated easily during the lautering process. If you have malt that's not produced to a high quality, even if it's somewhat available, it will be difficult to extract during the brewing process because compounds that will basically prevent lautering won't be modified to the right level. They won't be degraded, and they'll create a high viscosity condition or compounds that will plug the lauter bed and prevent it from easily separating, right? So the malting process needs to be uniform. It needs to be controlled so that the process goes evenly and you end up with the right or the correct level of modification at the end, so that all that good stuff inside the raw barley kernel is now easily accessible and extracted during the brewing process.
How much are you threading the needle? Because it seems to me like you don't let it germinate enough, no good. You let it germinate too much, no good. I mean, you got this dialed in now where you know like exactly how long it has to sit and sprout before you put it in the kiln?
Yeah, so there's definitely some level of, it's not it's not a tiny window, but it's
Like a day, maybe?
I'd say less than that, but we do a lot of work on the front end with different barley varieties and as we receive different crop years. We're doing small scale testing before we bring it into the full size malt house. And we do that to ensure that we know that the process we're going to use will give us the right level of modification that we need to create whatever specific product we're trying to make. Some barley varieties are better used for different products. So when you look at what a regular 2-row base malt is, like a brewer's malt, we'll use a different variety for that than we will for something like a Bonland or Munich malt. They have different requirements. They have very different specifications in terms of color and flavor, right? So we need to have the raw material that's best suited to make that finished product.
Because every malt has its own function.
Yes, absolutely.
In a particular home brew recipe, you're going to have, 85, 90% of it's going to be the 2-row.
Yep.
And you're going to have caramel malts. You might have some Vienna malt, some Munich malt, manipulating color. Carapils, for example, is really good for head retention.
Correct.
And things like that. So, Ron, a while ago, you mentioned 50 products. Mm-hmm. Like that feels like a lot happening. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. It's just building on what you mentioned. There are so many different malts that brewers need to use to get the beer they're brewing. And we can think of beers all the way from Pilsners to stouts in terms of what a brewer might need. And IPAs kind of sit in the middle in terms of the malt.
Like above in the middle, though, right? Like on a pedestal?
Some people would say that.
I'd argue they're not meant,
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a good thing Allison isn't here.
Yes, it is.
She loves malty beers.
Yeah. And I'm drinking a porter here.
Okay. And we're
it's
going to
very
get
good.
each of you a 547. That'll be your next.
Yeah, that's great. But for instance, one of the product lines I think of, for instance, is caramel malts. And we are the leader in caramel malts in the U.S. And we have everything from a caramel 10 on the light end to a caramel 20, caramel 40, caramel 60, caramel 80, caramel 120, and then a caramel 200 that we call crystal red. And depending on what beer a brewer's brewing, he may want to use one or two of those in a brew along with some other malts.
How do you determine what is caramelization a measurement of? Is it just color, taste, sugar content?
So caramel malts or crystal malts, as they'd be called in Europe, the U.S. is great in that we don't always follow the rules. So we call our caramel malts specifically caramel, whatever the SRM would be then, right? So it's a caramel 10.
SRM is that color unit.
The color, right? So it's specified by color, but it really gives a different intensity of roasting, right? Caramel malts that we make are in Europe would be called a crystal malt because they're made in a roaster and they go through a true crystallization. So you're taking green malt straight from germination and you're then bringing it over to a roaster, holding that grain with the moisture in the grain itself. So we actually retain the moisture in the drum of the roaster and we elevate the temperature to brewing temperatures, right? So the same temperatures that brewers are using to extract or convert and extract sugar, we're using that inside the roaster to actually convert the starch inside of the barley kernels into sugar. So once that starch is converted to sugar, we then dry it out, and then increase the temperature of the product so that it forces the Maillard reaction. It forces a variety of different reactions that ultimately change the intensity of the color and the flavor. You're going to go through a process that you can actually, while we're in the roasting process, we can actually taste and see the flavor change, right? So you can see the color change. You can watch that, but then you can taste it and you can actually get a better understanding of how the flavor evolves through the process, because a caramel 10 and a caramel 20 share some overlapping flavors, but a caramel 10 and a caramel 80 share very little flavor, right? They have some caramel flavor, but a caramel 80 has a much more intense set of flavors that really make it distinct, in that you wouldn't be able to use just 1% of a caramel 80 or a 120 to replace a caramel 10 because the flavors are just not the same. And that's because of that intense roasting process that creates those unique flavors.
So you mentioned the Maillard reaction. Allison we do a science of beer class as well. And she described the Maillard reaction, and now I'm just going to prove to her that I was paying attention, as kind of a toast. When you're making toast at your house, some people like their toast very light. Yep. And some people, like it. So the light colored toast, people would have to scrape all that. That's the Maillard reaction.
Correct. Yeah, and actually, I do the same when we're talking sensory with customers or teaching a class or anything like that. I usually describe flavors in terms of the intensity on my toaster.
Right. So the little dial is the Maillard reaction.
Yep.
So Ron, you're drinking a porter, and that's probably going to have Crystal 80 in there. Are we?
Probably some Crystal 80, but certainly either chocolate or dark chocolate malt, maybe a little bit of black barley or roasted barley for color and some of those really strong roasted notes. And then depending on the brewer, probably some other things. Mm-hmm. But one of the things to come back to, even for something like a porter that's a really dark beer with a lot of strong character to it, is that a lot of the listeners probably know that beer is normally about 15 to 20% specialty malt and about 80% base malt. Where Briess is really focused is on specialty malt. We offer base malts, but that's a smaller part of our business. And where we're the leader in the industry is in specialty malts, going back decades. And we'll talk about the history at some point. But that's where our primary focus is. And that's why the product line is so large, because it meets the needs of all those different beers. A lot of the recipes that I see from brewers have anywhere from 4 to 7 or 8 malts in them.
Wow.
I was going to say, one of the beers here was was created by accident.
Oh, yeah, that's on my notes. Don't go to that
Okay.
yet, because we got to touch on that. I want to come back to chocolate, not the chocolate malted milk balls. That's an entirely separate conversation. But chocolate malts in brewing, how does a malt become chocolated?
So chocolate malts are made in a roaster, much like crystal malts, but they go through a very different process. So those malts are dark roasted malts they start out as base malt, right? So
like 2-row or 6-row.
So something that's been steeped, germinated, and kilned. And then we take that grain and we bring it over to the roaster, and we'll go through, a typical recipe, and as we increase in temperature, product temperature, you can actually, it's really interesting. You can stand outside the building and smell what's coming out of the roaster, right? You can smell the exhaust, basically. I wouldn't recommend sticking your head too far in it. It's very hot.
Is that why Bobby's usually hanging around outside sniffing the air?
It's a great way because if it's not in the grain, if it's coming out the exhaust, it's no longer in the grain, right? So if you're smelling something that's coming out of the product, it can't be in the product anymore, right? So when you go through the process, it goes through this series of changes in aroma, right? So the exhaust goes through a similar change. There's a section in the middle of the roasting process that smells a lot like burnt popcorn, and I don't imagine if we had a burnt popcorn malt, it would do very well. But almost right after that is when the chocolate notes start to hit, and it's this just delightful shift from an acrid flavor to a nice, pleasant, mellow flavor. And that's because a lot of those acrid flavors are being removed during the roasting process. So as you're increasing in temperature, you're volatilizing certain compounds. Those acrid compounds are coming out in the exhaust, leaving you with a much more mellow product at a certain range of temperature. So as you're applying temperature, you're not just creating flavor, you're removing other flavors that are that could be beneficial, or in this case, they're detrimental to the finished product. So you want to make sure you're through that step before you're approaching your finished chocolate flavor.
So I'm getting Willy Wonka vibes right now. Like if I go to Manitowoc, is there like a chocolate malt wing? And is there like a crystal 10 to 60 wing? Like
Their entire workforce is Oompa Loompas.
I mean, maybe we've got one or two. But.
Do you have for example, we have a sour on tap, and if the sour kicks, you obviously can't put another beer on that line.
Sure.
Is that how roasting works? Is there enough happening in a specific drum roaster that you can't use it for chocolate and then, carapils or whatever the case is?
Sure. So roasted products, depending on what they are, you wouldn't want to go back and forth between the same product. You would have to go through a changeover. Because it's a solid and not a liquid, we don't have the same concerns that brewers have with sour beer and a standard beer. But so we have to go through changeover processes to make sure we're not contaminating one product with the other. But in large part, all of our roasters can make the same product with the appropriate changeovers. So we would make on the same roaster, we would potentially make a caramel malt one day, a dry roasted malt the next day.
Wow. So now is the time for what you were talking about earlier.
Oh, go for it. You know what I was going to say.
Yeah. So we have a beer called 547, which I talk about quite a lot on here. We had an order, and I think we get all of our specialty malts from you guys. But the funny story was something ended up like mislabeled, or there was something happened somewhere, and we ended up getting more of a red-based malt than one of the crystals. And as they were brewing this double IPA, they noticed that it was red. And as Bobby likes to describe it, it was a wonderful event because it literally led to the genesis of an entirely new beer. A beer that you would love because it's maltier than a typical IPA.
It sounds great.
Right. And it's the most gorgeous red color. So what started as some miscommunication somewhere, I don't remember where the issue was, we ended up producing a completely new beer that is it's like a keystone beer around here. We release it every Christmas. It flies out of the tap room and it was all created by Not a contamination, mind you, but a mistake.
Sure.
Which is awesome.
Yeah, and the malting process is, a lot like the brewing process in that, things happen during the process. It's a very, there's a lot of machinery involved. There's a lot of, there's a lot of things that can go wrong in the process, right? And, obviously we want to do the best we can to prevent those things.
Well, in this case, we were delighted that something happened somewhere.
Yeah, it's stepchild for those who are
right.
Red-headed
Thank
stepchild
you.
because it
Yes.
turned out red.
Yeah, and when things occur, that's often what can we do with this now to either try something new, or you've got some condition that's out of your standard process that you can't turn it into what you wanted to in the first place. So how do you adapt and quickly make a decision to say, what can we do about it?
Yeah.
And that's, on the small scale, that's really interesting. On the big scale, it's a little daunting, but it can result in some unique differences, right?
It's like Bob Ross.
Yeah.
He makes a little mistake and then it becomes a beautiful tree or whatever the case is.
Yeah, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, you don't have anywhere to go with that as a product, right? But it can become the genesis for a new product, right? It can be, well, this turned out interesting because of X, Y, and Z. What happened, and how do we reproduce it if we find that trait
Right.
desirable? So,
Because as Ron said, malting and brewing, and I'll let you finish it.
Is at the intersection of art and science.
Oh, that was good.
I think Steve Jobs used that to explain the iPhone originally.
Yeah, I'm going to give Ron credit. I think it was yeah,
Right here, right now.
right here today.
it's definitely not on his office wall.
It should be.
No.
So you're in Chilton
Yes.
and Jordan's in Manitowoc. What's the difference between the two campuses?
Yeah, Chilton is where we have our global headquarters, and we've got our office there, and then we have the old malt plant, the Chilton Malting Company, that until a couple of years ago was the oldest operating malt house in the country, built in 1901. And so we're not operating that anymore because we acquired the Manitowoc facility in 2014. And so we've got the office in Chilton, and then a half hour to east on the shores of Lake Michigan, we've got the Manitowoc malt plant.
This seems like a good opportunity then to get into the fact that this is a pretty old company. I mean, you guys have been around a while.
It is. Yeah, starting as early as 1876 in Eastern Europe, the Moravia region of the Czech Republic.
And that's going to wrap up this episode of Respecting the Beer. Be sure to come back next week as we get the full history of Briess Malt Ingrededient Company. If you're interested in a beer festival instead of Mile of Music, maybe getting away from the massive crowds, you can head on over to Manitowoc for the Malt City Brew Fest 2025. Ron will tell you about it in next week's episode, but this week I thought I'd share with you as well. Respecting the Beer is produced by me, David Kelso. Head on over to the Facebook group to get updates between the episodes, and support the show over on Patreon, where you can get episodes a week ahead of time, content you don't hear in the main feed, and a special beer just for the Patreon fans. Links to both are in the show notes. And until next time, please remember to respect the beer.